What is up, everyone? Welcome back to the PFN Scouting Podcast. I'm Ian Cummings, joined with my good friend, co-host Derek Tate, fellow NFL Draft fantasy football analyst. We are about a month out from the NFL Draft now. It's pretty far in the rearview mirror. We're still going to go over some of the details before we fully transition to the 2025 NFL Draft class. That said, if you want to get some insight on our process, how we make that transition, what we're thinking about, what we're taking into account, you can go to last week's episode where we went in depth with some of our football scouting processes. Always a fun one to talk about the nitty gritty in a sense, right? But today we are circling back to the 2024 NFL Draft just for a little bit, but with a future-minded focus, right? What are some of the most improved units across the board on the offensive and defensive side of the ball? That will be next. But first off, I got to ask, Derek, how you doing, man? It's been a little over a week since we last spoke. How you doing? Any new developments in your life? What's going on? What's the haps?
Oh, there's always new developments going on every other day. It feels like with the girls, two little toddler young daughters that are constantly challenging me and keeping me on my toes, so to say. So there's always new milestones, new things that they're saying, doing that I could write a book on, and I probably will write a book on it one day, but nothing out of the ordinary. When it comes to football, we're kind of settled, like the dust is settled, and we've got a chance to kind of not only take a look at the rearview mirror as far as the 2024 NFL Draft, but how it projects to the upcoming, NFL season. And then, of course, it's never too early to start talking about incoming prospects for the 2025 NFL Draft and beyond. So nothing new in the football world, but of course, there's always something that's going on in the Tate household.
What would the scouting report be? Scrappy, speedy? Those are probably the two central qualities for them, you think?
Yeah. So the oldest is, kind of got a longer, leaner build. She's kind of super explosive, whereas the younger, my two daughters, she's a tank. She's super strong, already picking up things that she's not supposed to be picking up, moving them from point A to point B. And, occasionally if they wrestle over a toy, it's actually the younger one that can win on occasion. So we're getting some glimpses into their athletic profiles at a very young age.
That's cool. It's she's like picking up something heavy. It's like, I'm impressed, but put that down. Like, hey, come on.
Careful, honey.
That's great. Glad to hear things are going good. My twin brother, I have a twin. I don't know if people know that, but he's getting married in July. So we had a little bachelor celebration this past weekend. And it wasn't anything crazy. We went to Sleeping Bear Dunes in northern Michigan, and we hiked a lot, almost a little too much. It was fun, though. It was fun. It was a lot of fun, great sights. My feet were about to fall off by the end of it. But we're back in the office. We're sedentary again. So we're just kind of sitting, staying put, and we're talking football. So let's get right into it. We've gone over the updates. This is the fun part of the offseason, right? It's a little boring on the outside because there's nothing going on. Teams are kind of getting acclimated with the camps and things like that. But for the evaluator standpoint, right, from the analyst's perspective, there's still so much possibility, right? We don't have the 2024 season to sober 90% of the teams and fans, right? So we can get excited about things. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to indulge a little bit in that excitement, and we're going to talk about some of the most improved teams on the surface on both the offense and defensive side of the ball. Before we get into that, though, because I know, Derek, we were both taking accounting of the picks that were made and, which teams really honed in on certain areas. Were there any teams that stood out to you as one where you said, maybe I don't know what the ceiling is exactly, but I know for a fact, both on offense and defense, they made pretty major improvements, both with talent and need filling. There was one team that stood out to me within that category where, I was trying to fit offense or defense, and both sides of the ball really stood out. And that was the Washington Commanders. I think what they were able to do on offense, getting Jayden Daniels, I'm on record saying I would have taken Drake Maye as a prospect, right? But again, I think Jayden Daniels is a great scheme fit. I think he can be a great player. I think he's athletic, accurate, all of that two-phase ability is there. And then they got Ben Sinnott, who I think could be a target funnel at tight end. They got Luke McCaffrey, who's a really solid rotational receiver. Maybe a little rich for him, but again, I think at the tail end of round 3, take that dart throw. If you'd like the athletic profile, if you'd like the versatility, go for it. And then they got Brandon Coleman, who I think does legitimately have the ability to be that starting left tackle for them with the foot speed, the athleticism, the proportional length, the density. And then on defense, they got Mike Sanders still as an elite nickel defender. They got Johnny Newton at defensive tackle, who in the Dan Quinn scheme, you can move him around, right? They got Jordan McGee on day 3, who I think was a really good sleeper at linebacker with that playmaking range, the tackling ability, some versatility again on the attack, and Dominique Hampton, who again kind of fits that Quinn mold at safety. They were one of the teams where I was checking the boxes, and I think again, like there is some projection involved with a few of these guys. And for Sainristil, I would have preferred that they got a boundary corner because Emmanuel Forbes, I don't know how he's going to do in year 2, right? That part is still a little suspect. But overall, man, I think both on offense and defense, the Commanders were one of those few teams where I could look at their draft haul and say, yeah, I think you made pretty major strides in the right direction on both sides of the ball.
The Commanders certainly stood out to me. I thought Johnny Newton was a fantastic value early in the second round. And then you address, I think, a position of need at the tight end position with Ben Sinnott and Mike Sainristil. I agree that I have questions about Manny Forbes. Living here in the DC area, I watched plenty of Washington Commanders football last year, and the fact that he lost his starting job, that's not encouraging for a guy that you took one pick before Christian Gonzalez. Yeah. So I agree that the boundary corner is where I would have liked to prioritize. And I'm kind of surprised that Dan Quinn and the rest of that staff didn't, given how much they ran a lot of, outside physical man-to-man coverage in Dallas during his time there. But Sainristil is a very, very good player. So he's going to certainly come in and help that secondary. I thought they addressed both sides of the ball and added talent on both sides of the ball. And I thought it was a little rich for McCaffrey as well, but I see the path, right? I see the movement skills. And I think that he's still learning the position, right? Because he's playing quarterback entering the college game at Nebraska. So his transition from quarterback to a full-time receiver, I thought went really well there at Rice. So there's a lot of tools that you can move forward with, and certainly interested to see how he figures into that equation with Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson. Another team that I thought addressed both sides of the ball, and it's another team that had a lot of draft capital, was the Arizona Cardinals. Getting Darius Robinson, that team struggled mightily against opposing rushing attacks last year. And I think Robinson comes in and can certainly kind of, again, specific scheme or tech fit is something that maybe they prefer, that versatility along the defensive line unit. Of course, you go and get Marvin Harrison Jr., who is, I think, the best receiver prospect in this class and arguably the best one to come out in the last 5 to 10 years. But then you even go farther. I loved Max Melton out of Rutgers. So addressing that secondary, and you bring in Trey Benson, and then even in the third round, you bring in Isaiah Adams to kind of fortify the interior of that offensive line. I thought the Arizona Cardinals did a very good job on both sides of the ball with a lot of draft capital, and kind of took advantage of their recent transactions and trades to acquire draft capital and address the roster appropriately.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that defense fits together, like you said, because Darius Robinson, for me, the tricky part was projecting where he was going to go in round 1 and where he's going to be used, right? Because he played defensive tackle for the majority of his Missouri career. Isaiah McGuire moved on in 2023, and then you saw him, play more 5-tech, 7-tech outside the tackle, and he was actually pretty good when he was able to do it, right? You could see that probably shouldn't be a full-time role for him, but that ability is there. So how is Jonathan Gannon going to use him? In free agency, they signed Kyrus Tonga, nose tackle. They signed Justin Jones, Bilal Nichols, 2 pretty solid rotational guys over the past few years. So that interior defensive line is looking a lot better. So the question is, where does Darius Robinson file in? Because I think that edge room is also a little bit, it's solid, right? It's respectable, but there is room for something more. And that's another area where I think on day 3, getting Xavier Thomas from Clemson was another really good pick, because he's kind of, if there was anyone to complement a player like Darius Robinson, who is probably going to be primarily a power rusher if he's rushing from outside, then more of a 3-tech, 4-eye hybrid, strong side defensive end, 5-tech, right? But there's a confined prescription of roles for him. With Xavier Thomas, you have the undersized speed and bend rusher who's got good hands, so he can complement that well. So it's going to be tricky because we don't know where exactly Robinson's going to play, but I like what they were able to do to complement him later on. Then you mentioned it too. Max Melton was one of my favorite corners in the class. I think a top 5 CB prospect for me. Can play the slot, can play the boundary, explosive, tenacious, very versatile. And then they got Dadrian Taylor Demerson in round 4, which was a really fun pick for me. That was a top I think he was in my top 50. Yeah. So looking back at Texas Tech, the versatility. You can play single high, you can play two high, you can play in support. He's not an overwhelming support presence, but again, he's a really rangy playmaker on the back end too. When you look at their safety situation, Jalen Thompson, Buda Baker, I think Baker's a free agent next year too. So that was a really nice future-minded move. Where I think in the immediate timeline, if you need someone who can play off-man nickel, on a down-to-down basis, right? I think case by case, Taylor Demerson can do that, but then he can rotate in at safety as well and play a multitude of roles there. So the Cardinals was one team that I put specifically for the defensive side of the ball. And I do think offensively improved as well. Marvin Harrison Jr., obviously that kind of goes without saying, right? We thought probably going to go to number 4 to the Cardinals, right? And obviously when you do the mock drafts, you try and, hedge for different possibilities. But at the end of the day, near generational wide receiver, you have almost no receivers, pulled the trigger, right? So they were able to do that. And then, the questions for me on day 2, Tip Ryman was a little bit of a reach for me. That was more of a day 3 guy. But again, he's probably the best blocking tight end in the class, right? So you're getting a pretty solid floor there. And then Isaiah Adams, very physical guard as well, who's got that explosion, who's got guard tackle versatility as well. So the Cardinals were another one for sure that kind of piqued my interest. Would have liked a little more value on the offensive side, but then I think on defense, they made up for it. And also another guy I forgot to mention, Elijah Jones from Boston College. Yeah. They got him in round 3. I wasn't sure he was going to go round 3 because he was a 25-year-old rookie, right? So a little bit older, but his tape in 2023 was phenomenal, man. Phenomenal. 6'1", around 190. So a little bit longer, leaner, but really intelligent player, very explosive coming downhill, great playmaker as well. And he's got some slot boundary versatility too. So I think the Cardinals definitely improved the defense, and I think they improved the offense enough where you can say they took a step up. One of those teams where they had the capital and they delivered on it for sure. Let's get into the specific offensive winners, though. What was the first team that came to mind for you? I've got a few, and it's not a surprise, but they generally orbit around the QB selections too. Like the Bears, the Patriots thought did a good job. But what's the first team that comes to mind for you when we're talking offense and offensive units?
And specifically for the receiver room and maybe collection of pass catchers, the New England Patriots. Jalen Polk is certainly somebody who I thought had an outside chance of maybe sneaking into the back end of the first round as a very aggressive projection, but settles in right there at the top of the second round. And I think he can come in and be a high volume producer on day number 1 and kind of be a go-to option for Drake Maye. Because if we're going to retool this entire offense in the post Bill Belichick era, this team has felt like it's been devoid of a true number 1 wide receiver for a long time. And do I think that Jalen Polk is ever going to be considered a top 5 receiver in the NFL? Probably not.
Hey, come on.
But do I think that he can be a very, very, very productive pro receiver that is a consistent go-to option, has formation versatility and exceptional ball skills? Yes, I do. And I think that he provides a nice safety blanket for Drake Maye, and they're going to be able to build a ton of chemistry and rapport together. And when you add Javon Baker out of UCF to play what I think is probably going to predominantly be out on the outside, maybe as an X receiver, there are some inconsistencies to his game, but the profile, I still believe in there's a lot of fluidity and movement skills and separation ability that I really think can translate if he tightens it up. Sometimes there's a lot of unnecessary movement in there that he throws in that tries to do a bit too much in his releases, sometimes at the top of his stem. If he can clean and tighten that stuff up and kind of eliminate those focus drops, I think you could have yourself a really good player in Javon Baker who can operate outside as a complement to what you're going to get from Jalen Polk in the slot. And another dart throw at the very end of the draft, a positionless wonder, Jaheim Bell, though. I like him out of Florida State. I love what he does as a yak threat, somebody who can create after the catch. And I think that fits in really well with Jalen Polk, with Javon Baker. Do I think that Bell's going to have a huge role immediately in this offense? Probably not. They're going to have to kind of figure it out because he's kind of an H-back, move tight end tweener. But collectively as playmakers for Drake Maye to get the ball in their hands and make his job easier, I think the New England Patriots hit a home run.
Yeah, for sure. The Jalen Polk slander, come on, man. Acting like he's not going to be a top 5 receiver in the NFL.
My bad. I'm
Come
sorry,
on, man. You got to know who you're talking with. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. That's the question for me, right? Is like, this was one of those units where I was looking at, we know they're better now. All right. Like the Patriots coming into the draft, everyone was talking about them. Like whoever lands with this team at QB, it's going to be rough sledding because they don't have a lot. Right. And then they got Jalen Polk, and then they got Javon Baker, and then they got Caden Wallace at offensive tackle, who I think's got the athletic tools to be a solid player. And they got Jaheim Bell late, who I think, again, fits that H-back role. Like you said, I expect them to use him on motions a lot, as a design blocker at times too, because he wasn't an elite blocker in college, but the willingness was there. The willingness, and I think the range to get to his spots as well. The athleticism really helps it out too. So I think he's a very good component to have. But the question for the Patriots is, can any of these guys be a wide receiver one? And I think that's a long-term question. I don't think they need to answer it in 2024. I think right now we're just looking for baseline improvement. All right. If we can get that, right, because they had Devontae Parker, they had Juju Smith-Schuster. We just need separation right now, guys. That's the baseline. If we can get that, we're in a good spot. But I do like, again, we don't know if they have a wide receiver one in this group, and that's okay. We don't need to know that right now. What we do know is that they have a setup where you can have an X, a movement Z, and a Y, and a slot guy, right? You can kind of, there's more freedom for Pop Douglas to be used as that slot guy and weapon as well. And then you have Javon Baker, who can, again, the vertical speed is the question for me. All right. Does he have enough vertical speed to win again, to separate, stack at the second level, right? Because that's the biggest thing that might limit his upside at the NFL level. But I do think he has enough route running chops, enough tracking ability, right? The flashes, the high end flashes are really, really compelling, right? So you just want him to get that, but he's got the play strength as well. He's got some rack to him. He's a good blocker as well. So a guy that you can put at the X spot, and then like we said with Jalen Polk, play him as that movement Z, move him across the formation, kind of in the similar Puka profile that we talked about multiple times. 6'1", 204, 32-inch arms, has that explosion, that fluidity, and then the catching instincts as well to capitalize on the throws that Drake Maye gets to you in those tight windows. So I think they definitely improved. How much they improved is something that we'll have to keep watching to see. But we know that there are steps being taken in the right direction. So that was good. Another team that, again, got that first-round quarterback. And again, Drake Maye was a phenomenal pick for them. Again, I think any of those top three QBs, like I'm bullish on all of them to see what they do. I think they all landed in pretty good spots because we talked about Drake Maye. Like, yeah, the Patriots, on paper, compared to the Commanders and the Bears, probably the worst supporting group, even with the picks that they made, right? They still need to prove something. But I do think Alex Van Pelt is a very good schematic fit for him. I think looking at what he did with Joe Flacco down the stretch with the Browns last year, that big-armed passer who can anticipate, who can hit those tight windows and move within the pocket, but then also create a little bit for himself. I think Maye gives more athletic upside. So, again, very excited to see what they do. And I think the offense at least has a little more multiplicity, and you can see the puzzle pieces starting to fit together. I think that's the best thing. That's the best thing for them. So another team that got that QB, pretty obvious, the Chicago Bears, right? I was looking at this offense, and I was just like, yeah, like this is going to be one of the first ones that I bring up because Caleb Williams definitely makes the difference at QB, but this wide receiver trio, man, and I was looking it up, like the leading receiver in the Bears history is like below 5,000 career yards, I think. Like it's oh god,
they've never had a 4,000-yard passer in a season. It's like never.
Oh my god, like I didn't realize, and I'm sorry, Bears fans. I want to give my condolences post haste. I know it's been a while, but man. It's been rough sledding. I know I just said that, but man, it's been tough. It's been tough. So wide receiver has not been a great position for them over their entire team history, and now they might have the best receiver trio in the league. Like I'm really hard pressed to find one that's better than this one on paper. A couple that I would go to, maybe the Texans. They just re-signed. They extended Nico Collins. They got Stephon Diggs. They got Tank Dell, who's an emerging star. Stephon Diggs petered out a little bit toward the tail end of last year. He's a veteran. He's going a little bit older. So if you ask me what team has the best,
Seahawks are really the only other team in that conversation.
Yeah,
I think.
DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and Jackson Smith and Jigba. If he can reach his ceiling this year, he showed flashes last year, but again, you're still waiting for that consistency. So if I'm hard pressed to choose, like what's the best receiver trio in the league? I know we talked about this a couple pod episodes ago when we were talking about that wide receiver trio element, but the Bears, man. DJ Moore is a fringe wide receiver one for fantasy purposes. I know that. And looking at that rack ability, the dynamic deep threat in the vertical plane, Keenan Allen is getting older, but he's still in his prime. He was very good last year, right? So
exceptional last year. Exceptional.
Yeah. So it's not like Stephon Diggs where, he was starting to peter out a little bit. Keenan Allen coming into the offseason was still that guy. And I think he is still that guy for at least 1 to 2 more years. And if he ends up not being the guy, you got Rome Odunze now, who has some similarities to him. So that wide receiver trio, I think for the Bears, who have been so, it's been such a tough go of it for them for such a long time. I think now the change of pace, just a complete 180. And I think it's something that you can be excited about if you're a Bears fan. So Caleb Williams being that guy at QB, Rome Odunze, DJ Moore, Keenan Allen at wide receiver. I mean, it is truly a complete 180. And then as a bonus, getting Kieran Amagaji on the offensive line, who I think if Nate Davis continues to struggle at offensive guard, you can slide Amagaji into guard. He can be a very good player there. Or he can play at tackle if Braxton Jones regresses. The Bears didn't have a ton of capital, right? And we kind of knew what they were going to do. You probably knew it was going to be Williams at number 1 and at number 9 overall. If one of those receivers was still there, it was pretty likely that they were going to get them. So none of us were super surprised by what they did. But nonetheless, you look back and you look forward at what this offense can look like. It's very exciting to think about.
You have no choice but to acknowledge that this offense got infused with a ton of quality talent. And we didn't even mention DeAndre Swift coming out of the backfield too, who is a very, very capable pass catcher. And I thought we saw some nice things from Roschon Johnson. I know I'm a big Roschon Johnson truther. And, them going and getting DeAndre Swift, not exactly the best sign that his role is going to significantly expand, but he's still a very good football player, can still pass protect, still has very reliable hands out of the backfield. So I think that, whether it's DeAndre Swift being the feature player or some sort of rotation between Swift and Roschon, then you throw in Cole Kmet, who I think is a very good tight end. You added Gerald Everett. Everything, the draft was just kind of the cherry on top with getting Rome Odunze and, the offensive tackle from Yale that his last name always, I'm almost scared to mispronounce it. But I do think that I do believe 100% that the Chicago Bears hit a home run. The only other team, Ian, that stands out to me on the offensive side of the ball that I feel like for what they want to do, I feel like they certainly got better is the Pittsburgh Steelers. Yeah. Troy Fautanu, Zach Frazier, Mason McCormick. That if you're just going to get your best starting 5 out there, and we'll see if McCormick figures into that in 2024. But Frazier's going to come in day number 1. He's going to be a starter. Fautanu's going to be a day 1 starter. And with Arthur Smith now as the new offensive coordinator, that man wants to run the football. I know the noise is going to be a lot about Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, what's going to look like under center, who's going to kind of emerge next to George Pickens as, a reliable pass catching second option to Pickens out on the outside. But up front, for the brand of football that Pittsburgh wants to play in the AFC North, man, they invested a lot of draft assets, and I think that they hit on all of them with the way the board fell, and they addressed a position of need to be able to impose their will on opposing defenses. I think they're going to run the football a lot. I think we're going to see a lot of Najee Harris, a lot of Jalen Warren in 2024, while giving, hopefully, Russell Wilson or Justin Fields more time to throw, because both of those quarterbacks like to hold the football for a very long time before they let it go. Of course, that a lot of that has to do with their dynamic play extension ability. But as far as for what the Steelers want to do with Arthur Smith now as the new offensive coordinator, I think that, and bringing in Roman Wilson too as a vertical option to work, kind of a movable Z to operate alongside George Pickens, getting him in the 3rd round, I thought was a very nice value, because I thought that there was a chance that he could go in the 2nd round. So as far as value and the role that he could step into in this offense, I thought the Pittsburgh Steelers also did a great job on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, for sure. And you brought up a great point, which is that, this offensive line, I think the specific prospects that they got kind of hedge for the prime weaknesses of Justin Fields and Russell Wilson. Both guys were dynamic at the prime. Wilson's a little bit past his prime now, right? So, you're still getting that solid veteran, but, one of his major Achilles heels is he holds the ball too long. He'll be big play hunting sometimes, right? He won't work the middle of the field. Troy Fautanu was renowned for his recovery ability and flexibility and athleticism and his active hands, where he can neutralize guys. And even if he loses initially, he's got the recovery capacity and the athleticism and the flexibility to close that gap and reposition himself, right? So very, very proficient at that. Zach Frazier, very smart, intelligent pass protector who can recognize blitzes, who can, reposition himself and kind of call out threats and pass off stunts and things like that. So 2 guys who I think are very reliable, but also effective in recovery too, and allows the QB to stay back there a little bit more. Hopefully plays into that and allows those QBs to play a little more comfortable on schedule. We'll see if that can happen. But yeah, that the Pittsburgh Steelers, was looking at their draft, and that really stood out to me. Like, no team improved their offensive line more than the Steelers, getting Troy Fautanu, getting Zach Frazier, and Mason McCormick on day 3, who I think could be their starting guard in 2025. 2024 might be a little early. I think he still has some work to do with his balance and leveraging, but they got Isaac Sumalo, they got James Daniels, so he doesn't have to start right away. And if he does eventually file in, I think you've got that explosion, that power, that torque output where, he can make a difference if you need him to. So the vibes are immaculate with the Steelers. You got Arthur Smith with the mustache. You got the Maulers up front, man. It's looking like 80s football again. It's going to be fun. It's going to be very fun. And I know we tend to doubt the Steelers a little bit, but Mike Tomlin has still never had a losing season, I don't think. So it's incredible. It's one of those things where the model of consistency, and even though there are questions of QB and how the offense is going to file in at the rest of the spots, I think there's enough there where they're going to stay competitive and they're going to be a thorn in the side of a lot of AFC teams. So it's going to be fun to see a couple more teams on the offensive side that I listed. 2 teams from the AFC West who I'm not sure what they're going to, and I wasn't head over heels for either class, but I liked both classes. The Raiders with their first 3 picks, if all of these picks hit, and we're pretty sure Brock Bowers is going to hit at 13th overall because he's got that versatility, that dynamic ability. We talked about him at length, but he is the consummate weapon for your offense, and I really love that ability that he provides. Jackson Powers-Johnson as an offensive guard in the second round, I really liked that pick. I think it was a great value. If he can stay healthy, I think you're looking at a guy who can be a difference maker. And then the wild card for the Raiders for me is Delmar Glaze, who they got in round 3 from Maryland. This guy is around 6'4", 320, over 34-inch arms, so he's got that physical profile that you want. He's got really good lateral mobility as a pass protector. I want him to improve his run blocking and power drive, but again, he's got left-right versatility already. He's played both spots. I think if he reaches a ceiling, you could have your starting right tackle. So if the Raiders, that's the key. If the Raiders' first 3 picks reach their ceiling, that offense is looking a lot better for Aiden O'Connell or whoever joins them as the QB in 2025. I don't think Aiden O'Connell is the long-term solution. Ideally, you would have liked to get a QB this year, but 12 QBs went within the first 12 picks. So it was a little tough.
Half of the first 12 picks for all quarterbacks.
Exactly. So it's like, if you're the Raiders, we're like, what do we do here? We just kind of sit back and,
we'll take Bowers.
We'll take Bowers. We'll play Bowers a QB, Wildcat QB. That would be pretty fun. I think you might be able to pull that off, but he's got the prototypical frame for it. But that was a fun class. I really liked what they did. And the next one is the Denver Broncos, who stole that QB from the Raiders, Bo Nix, number 12. That was a tough team because we always, and I'll go quick with this because we cover the Broncos a little bit. But the moral of the story for me is that with the capital they had, which was limited, with the leverage they had, which was limited, I think they did a good enough job to improve that offensive a little bit. Getting Bo Nix in number 12, I think he fits the scheme well. We've talked about that. But then Troy Franklin playing the board, getting him in round 4. I wasn't as high on him. He was more of a top 75 guy for me. I was a little lower on him than some people had him as a round 1 guy. I couldn't get there, with the physicality issues. But round 4, I think, was a phenomenal value for him, and especially getting him with a QB who has pre-existing chemistry with him. I think that's the big thing. And then round 7, you get Nick Gargiulo from South Carolina at center, who people forget the Broncos lost Lloyd Cushenberry to the Titans in free agency. They don't have a bona fide starter right now. And I think Nick Gargiulo, I would not be surprised if he eventually becomes that because he's athletic, he plays square, he's pretty intelligent, he's pretty experienced. I really like a lot of what he brings to the table. So that's a sleeper pick, but I think the Broncos, with the capital they had, with what they were able to do, I think they did a good enough job where that offense might be able to take a step up. We'll see.
Yeah. I'm not, staunchly against, but when you said the 2 teams that you mentioned, because I think they did well in the draft, I do. I'm actually surprised when you said 2 AFC West teams. I would have bet a lot of money that you were going to go with the Los Angeles Chargers, seeing the fact that they got, in my opinion, the best offensive lineman in the draft with Joe Alt. And then, you know how high I am on Ladd McConkey. I've talked about him ad nauseum, but I think that he instantly comes in and is the best separator for Justin Herbert in this offense, and can also add additional value in manufacture touches and as a yak threat, as well as some vertical speed that was better than I thought when I looked at him on tape with a 4.39. But you even start seeing what they did on day 3, Kimani Vidal certainly intrigues me quite a bit out of Troy. There's some Josh Jacobs to his game. I love his center of gravity, his contact balance. I do see enough bursts to be able to squeak through small gaps, and I see some patience too that tells me that he's got kind of plus level vision and a nice feel for the position. And there's not a ton of competition there right now with Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins and, Isaiah Spiller or, whoever else is currently competing for, that number 3 spot on the depth chart. So Kamani Vidal stands out. And then even adding 2 additional receivers, because, I've gone at length about, not being super excited about Joshua Palmer. And, Quentin Johnston, I still think is a work in progress, to put it very kindly. I really like Cornelius Johnson and Brandon Rice in the 6th and 7th round for the Chargers being able to add kind of some young depth to kind of retool this entire receiver room after the departures of Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. So I like Brandon Rice's game. There feels like there could be a ceiling because I don't see, obviously he's being compared no matter what to his father, who's the best to ever do it. But I see a really nice physical outside receiver who can win in contested catch situations. And, I see some flashes of his father's deception in his route running. He's not the route runner that his father was, but I see a nice physical outside receiver who can contribute in an NFL offense if he can kind of improve and tighten up some of his his release packages kind of make me a little bit nervous at times, in particular if he is going to be operating as an X receiver. But Cornelius Johnson too, who is reuniting with Harbaugh from Michigan. I actually really like his athletic profile and interested to see, how he factors into this receiver room or if he's able to make the 53-man roster. So I kind of like some of the day 3 selections on the offensive side of the ball for the Chargers as well.
Yeah, the more I think about it, the more you could probably mention every single AFC West team, right? I think my thought process with the Raiders and Broncos is these are kind of the less recognized ones. So let's see if there's merit to what they did. And I thought there was, but you great shout with the Chargers, as Ali would say, great shout. Getting Joe Alt, who was that blue chip tackle prospect, and Lab McConkey, who I think was the perfect complement for what they have in that receiver room. You need reliability. You need a guy who can separate, and having that vertical speed in tandem with that is very valuable. My comp for him was Greg Jennings. So I think getting that kind of threat with Justin Herbert, not the quintessential white comp. Don't worry. I'm only looking at what's on the field. I think he's got the vertical speed. He's got the route running.
Mine's Emmanuel Sanders.
There we go. Synergy. You see? There we go. I love it. But Lab McConkey is one of those guys too. And I love that comp too, because that was one I was exploring because the athletic profile is similar, a little lean, a little smaller, but again, the route running chops are there. Super deceptive route runner, very nuanced. And then he's got rack ability with that slippery athleticism. And then he's got the vertical speed too. So one of those guys who I think is going to be a target funnel right away in that offense. So I agree completely. And I think Cornelius Johnson is the one I'm excited about because I think, multiple times he caught my eyes early as 2021. And, multiple times I was watching his game and I'm thinking he could be a better pro than college player. Because he's got the route running flexibility. Some of those comeback routes, some of those stop and goes, he's got that stopping ability and that flexibility, the foot speed, right? And then he's explosive. He's 6'3", so he can win downfield. Very excited to see what he can do. And worst case scenario for Quentin Johnston would be the worst case, but I think Cornelius Johnson, there is an outcome where maybe Johnson outproduces him down the line just because Johnson can't find a rhythm and Johnson is more comfortable in that offense. So we'll see. But again, I'm excited. I think they added a lot of depth at positions of need and getting Joe Alt at right tackle, who I think can be an all-pro pretty early in his career. It's going to be a fun one to watch. And the Chiefs as well, getting Xavier Worthy, Kingsley Suamataia, Jared Wiley. The moral of the story is the AFC West. It's an arms race to keep up with the Chiefs, and these teams are not sparing any expense. They're trying to see if they can get it done. We don't know if they will, but we'll be watching closely. One more team, really quick on offense, the Jets running back room, getting Malachi Corley. No, I'm kidding. I'm not going with the Corley standard. But they also doubled up with Isaiah Davis and Braylon Allen on day 3, which was interesting. Not what I would have done. But I do like Isaiah Davis a lot. I think he could potentially outperform his capital. So excited to see what they do. Let's move on to the defensive side of the ball with the time we have left. Derek, what is the first team on your mind for most improved defense, defensive unit, just anything in that realm?
I'm kind of going back and forth between two teams. Personally, I really liked what the Los Angeles Rams did on the defensive side of the football. Kind of doubling down. I mean, when you have arguably the greatest defensive player to ever lace him up, announce his retirement, this defense is going to look different, and no one's going to be able to fill that one-of-one role. But Jared Verse, I thought, was the most well-rounded defensive edge prospect in this class. Love his power to speed and the hip flexibility for a guy his size. Certainly is something that really stood out to me. I think he's of all the top edge rushers or edge prospects, I thought he was the best against the run. Probably doesn't give you the same pass rushing ceiling as someone like Latu, but still think he's going to come in and make a great impact early in his NFL career in this Rams defense. And then, kind of being joined by his running mate there at Florida State, Braden Fisk, kind of as an interior defensive lineman who I thought showcased his underrated athleticism at the NFL Combine, but is also a very, very good player. And Cameron Kitchens, safety out of Miami, was another addition to this secondary that has me pretty excited. I know that they had a really, really young secondary last year, and they managed to make it work, and you kind of continue to feed that pipeline, so to say, by bringing in Kitchen. So I thought the Los Angeles Rams had themselves a very nice defensive draft. Maybe one that's not super sexy, but it is something that I think they're going to all come in and make a contribution in their rookie year.
Yeah, there's a tweet that I posted. I can't remember. It was when Aaron Donald retired, right? And then Braden Fiskey's relative athletic score from our good friend Kentley Platty Math Bomb on Twitter came up, and I quote tweeted. I was like, "It's very appropriate that Aaron Donald retired just in time for Braden Fiskey to take the torch," right? Because looking at the athletic profile, and I was 90% kidding. I said in the tweet, 90% kidding. And then the Rams ended up taking Braden Fiskey. It's like, oh, okay. I guess they do have a plan here. Like Kobe Turner was a fringe rookie of the year candidate on the defense side of the ball last year. Phenomenal player from the Shrine Bowl who really showed off that athleticism, that sawed off frame. And I think Braden Fiskey, the thing that stood out with Fiskey for me on tape, this guy's motor is one of one. I mean, you have guys that have great motors, and then you have Braden Fiskey. He's a tier above. Any analogy you want to use, he eats nails for breakfast, right? That's Braden Fiskey. I mean, every single down, he was given 120%. Love to have that, especially with a guy as athletic as he is. A little bit shorter arms, but I do think he has enough power and strength to really survive. So I think getting Braden Fiskey, Jared Verse, like you said, phenomenal run defender, very good speed, power. The bend and the ankle flexion is the one thing where, I want to see it a little more consistently. But again, he's got the run defense, the power element is there, and he's a pretty good pass rusher when it comes to hand usage and his repertoire as well. So I think two guys who, again, you want to talk about defensive lines that improved, the Rams are definitely up there. Another unit that stood out to me, and this one's pretty straightforward, right? Because we knew they were probably going to target this, but the Eagles getting Cooper DeJean and Quinyon Mitchell. I mean, Quinyon Mitchell, I think is a great fit for Vic Fangio's scheme where you can play off ball, right? That was kind of his bread and butter in college at Toledo, is playing off ball. And, he said at the Senior Bowl, I think, like, that's just where I was comfortable. They kind of let me do what I wanted to do, and he wanted to play off ball because Quinyon Mitchell, what he does best is, use that click and close, that closing speed, that explosion, the ball tracking ability to be a playmaker, right? So I think he provides that element for them, and he's got the upside in press man, right? I don't want to say that it's there because there is some work to do with positioning and leverage IQ, but definitely is the short area quickness, the foot speed, the wheeling physicality, and then Cooper DeJean, man. I mean, I think he can play corner in Vic Fangio's scheme if you want him to in certain cover 3 zone looks, but I think he can play safety as well. You can play big nickel if you want him to. They got Chauncey Gardner-Johnson back in free agency, if I'm not mistaken. So he might be the nickel for them. But Cooper DeJean, I think, gives you that versatility where you can play him at safety. And again, the eye recognition, the playmaking ability, the range, the tackling, all of those things translate very well at safety as well. So I think secondary, the Eagles are up there for one of the teams that really improved that. The Lions did too. I think the Lions, I would have maybe spent that second rounder on something else, maybe an edge rusher if I could. But getting Ennis Rakestraw Jr. from Missouri, very good impressed man. And then Terrion Arnold at, I think, 24th overall or in the early to mid-20s. That guy was a top 10 prospect on my board. So getting him where you did is very impressive. And I think he's got the ability to be a very solid starter right out of the gate. I mean, one of those guys who doesn't have elite vertical speed, but that's one of the only knocks you can make on him because he's so fluid, so adaptable in press man and off man. And then he's got that hip flexibility where the moment a receiver makes his break, he's hinging around and he's closing that gap with that explosion too. So I think that the Eagles and the Lions stood out as teams that really improved that secondary, and especially for the woes that they had down the stretch last year. I mean, there were games where the Eagles couldn't really cover anyone, and the Lions, it was very well documented against the Buccaneers and the 49ers later on, where, you know, that secondary was kind of it was the sieve on the defensive side. So getting that talent was really the exact thing they needed. And I think they improved it for sure.
Yeah, no, I'm with you 100% there. I mean, specifically, you know, with the Philadelphia Eagles, Quinyon Mitchell, it's almost like he magnetizes to his receivers with that closing ability when the ball's in the air. It's impressive. So how he factors into that secondary room, and sometimes maybe it's not a one-for-one comparison because obviously the skill sets are vastly different, but you want to get your best five on the field so in a similar fashion to like your offensive line unit, right? It's not always, you know, have to pigeonhole a player to play a specific role. If you have the versatility, or if you have a ton of talented players that can provide versatility, you can give opposing defense or opposing offenses all kinds of different looks, which CJ Gardner-Johnson can operate very effectively as a nickel defender. Same, I think that Cooper DeJean definitely translate as a potential nickel defender in the National Football League, but he can also flex outside if you need him to. Quinyon Mitchell, wherever you need him, he's going to be able to make a contribution. You got Reed Blankenship and even, you know, Sidney Brown last year, you know, I tore his ACL at the end of the year. So do I expect Vic Fangio to be able to figure this out with the talent that he has now in that secondary room? I do. I'm very interested to see how this Philadelphia Eagles defense shapes up, because they were pretty rough last year. In particular, in the first, defending opposing slot receivers in the middle of the field, they really struggled. So they certainly have made it a point to address that area of the football field. I think they'll be exponentially better. We saw, you know, last season with Fangio in Miami, once Jalen Ramsey got back on the football field, that Miami defense transformed, and it was actually one of the better units in the entire National Football League. So I'm really excited about how Fangio is going to figure this all out on the defensive side of the football, including all that talent up front. And oh, by the way, you threw in Jeremiah Trotter Jr., a nice little legacy callback pick, but one that I could actually see also contributing at some point down the road during his NFL career. There with the Eagles with you, man. I wanted to bring up one other team, the Green Bay Packers. Edgerrin Cooper, you know, Javon Bullard. Those two top picks on the defensive side of the football. I know that they spent their first round pick on Morgan, I believe, out of Arizona, along the offensive line, but you know, to get Javon Bullard, who is certainly in the conversation for the top overall safety in this class, and Edgerrin Cooper, who was my number one off-ball linebacker in this class, certainly feels like good value on day two. I didn't like that they reached on Hopper in the third round. That felt like a bit of a misfire, but I also really like Evan Williams as well out of Oregon. So I thought that the Packers, who always have a ton of draft capital, address their biggest positions of need in this class. So it is something where I'm kind of excited to see how the talent they added on the second and third level impacts this defense in 2024. Yeah,
I'm intrigued to see where it settles out for them, because that's the key. They drafted three guys with safety positional designations: Javon Bullard, Evan Williams, and then Keaton Oladapo later on, right? And they're all different players a little bit, right? Javon Bullard is that safety who can play too high, a little bit of single high, but he might even project as a nickel defender, right? You know, they might play him at the slot because he can do that. Evan Williams is more of that strong safety who I think if you're looking for him to play underneath Xavier McKinney as that post safety, that could be a really good fit. Evan Williams is one guy who at the time I was looking at Javon Bullard as more of that guy for them when they picked him. But the more that I've gotten to reflect on that pick, the more I think you can play Bullard and nickel off man, and he can match up guys pretty well. And then Evan Williams, physical, explosive, rangy, pretty intelligent player who can react quickly to breaks. I really like that that fit in the box, complimenting Xavier McKinney over top. And then just as a sweetener, you got Keaton Oladapo too. So they had a weakness at safety. They knew it. They attacked it. I really like that. There was a little bit of a sense of maybe they're going a little too far, but the roster is almost complete, right? So again, I'm not going to knock it too much. The Packers have done a great job drafting over the past couple of years, and it's allowed them that flexibility where we can invest a lot in positions that we know could be a trouble area for them. So that was a fun one. Philadelphia Eagles all the way. I think the best five, if I had to pick the best five, right? I think Darius Slay still is a little bit in the tank. James Bradbury probably not going to see the field. They might cut him eventually. So I would say number one, Quinyon Mitchell, Darius Slay at corner. You got Cooper DeJean at safety, kind of as that roaming piece like we talked about. I don't think he's got the Jalen Ramsey flexibility or length, but I do think, in a similar light, you can play him because he's got the supportability, the playmaking. So that's our three. Reed Blankenship, when he's healthy, he's solid. I think he's going to be the guy who sees the field more often. And then Chauncey Gardner-Johnson probably is that nickel guy when Cooper DeJean is roaming at safety or corner either way. So I think Cooper DeJean is your wild card. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson is your nickel primary. You got Blankenship as your safety, and then you've got the two corners on the boundary who I think can really give quarterbacks fits with their closing speed and playmaking ability. So that's a fun one. Any other teams on your mind when it comes to defense real quick? We're almost out of time. One more that I'll bring up is just the Bengals. I think what they did on the defensive line, right? We knew that they were going to invest multiple picks. We were pretty certain. I like what they got with the player archetypes, and I was on the Bengals pod at PFN here with Dallas Robinson and Jay Morris, and they always do a great job each week. But they were talking about Chris Jenkins. He's bringing the energy already, which is good. I think he's a three tech with a lot of upside athletically, a very good run defender as well. And they complemented him with a natural nose tackle, McKinley Jackson, who's around 6'1", 325, 34-inch arms. So he's got that natural leverage, proportional length combo that you look for in that kind of profile. So the Bengals were another one that stood out to me. Any other teams in the defense side of the ball for you?
The Baltimore Ravens. Getting obviously Nate Wiggins in the first round, but Adisa Isaac at the end of in the third round. And then we're also talking about a guy that I was watching fall down the board, and I didn't understand it was TJ Tampa all the way to the end of the fourth round.
Yeah, that was one I was like, come on, who's going to take him? Who's going to take him? He's still there.
What happened? Like, what's going on here? But, we could talk about the safety Kane out of Purdue as well as a very, very
very good, very good sleeper.
Yeah, but but ultimately, Adisa Isaac and TJ Tampa felt like great value picks, and Nate Wiggins, I actually really like his athleticism, and it's something that the rich get richer there on the defensive side of the football for the Baltimore Ravens. So it's going to be interesting to see in the post Mike McDonald era how this all shakes out, but I thought that they added more talent on that side of the football, despite having one of the best units, if not the best unit in the entire National Football League last season. Yeah,
corner was one where it's like, I don't know if I would have gone with corner early on, but I know Brandon Stevens is going to be a free agent soon. Marlon Humphrey is getting a little bit older. So getting a guy with Wiggins' speed and playmaking ability and route recognition is a very good move. If you can get a little more weight on his frame, I feel he could be a good fit there. And then again, Adisa Isaac was the top 50 player for me. He went at the tail end of round 3. TJ Tampa was the top 64 player for me. He went in round 4 again. So very good value at multiple spots. I think they definitely invested in a unit that needed more investment. So that was a good one for them. That's all the time we got for you today. If there's any team or unit that you felt was left out, feel free to leave them in the comments below. But we will be back next week with more post-2024 NFL draft, pre-2024 season, and also pre-2025 NFL draft analysis. Plenty of other good things on the way. See you next week. In the meantime, I'm Ian Cummings for Derek Tate. Peace out. Have a good one.